Jae-ho Kim looked at his old construction mech suit one last time. After 25 years of working in space, this would be his final shift. The massive metal suit stood tall in the preparation room of Dawn Station, its worn surface telling stories of countless repairs and spacewalks. Just one more day, he said to himself, touching the scratched metal surface. His fingers traced over the numbers painted on the chest. CW2187. This machine had kept him alive through solar storms, meteor showers, and dangerous repair jobs. The preparation room was quiet at this early hour. Most workers were still sleeping in their pods, but Jae-ho always came early. He liked the peace before the day began. The room's bright lights showed the other construction mechs standing in their docking stations, like silent giants waiting to wake up. He pulled out the small photo he always kept in his pocket. It showed his daughter, Hae-nul, smiling at her college graduation. She had sent him a message yesterday. "Come home safe, Dad. I can't wait to show you my new research lab." Jae-ho smiled and put the photo back. He had missed so much of Hae-nul's life while working in space, but the money had given her a good education. Now she was a successful scientist, and he could finally retire. The door slid open with a soft hiss. "Early as always, old man," said Taewon Park, his supervisor. The younger man walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Jae-ho. "Old habits," Jae-ho replied, taking the coffee. 25 years of being early is hard to change. Taewon looked at the construction mech. "You know, when you leave, we're losing our best operator. These new kids don't understand these machines like you do. They rely too much on computers." Jae-ho took a sip of his coffee. "The computers are good, but they can't feel when something's wrong. These mechs, they talk to you if you know how to listen." He started his daily check of the mech suit. His hands moved with practiced ease, testing joints, checking pressure seals, and measuring oxygen levels. Each motion was smooth and certain, like a doctor examining a patient. The station's morning alarm sounded, marking the start of the workday. Other workers began filing into the preparation room, their voices echoing off the metal walls. Most were young, trained on the newest equipment. They nodded respectfully to Jae-ho. Everyone knew this was his last day. "Today's job is simple," Taewon said, reading from his tablet. "We need to repair the cargo ship's outer hull. Some small meteor hits damaged it last week." Jae-ho nodded. He had done hundreds of hull repairs. It was a good way to end his career. Simple, routine work. He pressed the button that opened his mech suit. It split down the middle, revealing the padded interior he knew so well. The familiar smell of metal and recycled air greeted him as he climbed inside. The suit closed around him with mechanical whirs and clicks. Screens lit up, showing oxygen levels, power readings, and external camera views. The neural interface connected, and suddenly the massive machine felt like a second skin. Jae-ho moved the mech's arms and legs, testing the responses. Everything worked perfectly. Through the main viewport, he could see Earth hanging in the distance, a blue marble wrapped in white clouds. "Ready for my last dance," he said over the radio. "Copy that," Taewon replied. "Airlock 7 is prepped for your exit. Let's make this a quiet day." As Jae-ho walked his mech toward the airlock, he thought about how this massive machine had become more than just equipment. It had been his companion in the emptiness of space, keeping him safe while he helped build humanity's road to the stars. Little did he know that this quiet day would become the greatest test of his life, and his deep understanding of these machines would be the only thing standing between him and the cold void of space. Jae-ho's construction mech moved smoothly through space toward the damaged cargo ship. The ship was huge, its gray hull stretching for hundreds of meters. Small marks from meteor impacts dotted its surface like tiny craters. Through his external cameras, Jae-ho spotted the damage they needed to fix. 3 holes, each about the size of a fist, had pierced the outer hull. It was routine work, but something felt different today. His instruments showed strange energy readings coming from the ship's engine section. "Control, I'm picking up unusual readings, Jai-Ho said into his radio. The engine core temperature is fluctuating. Readings look normal from here, Ta-Won's voice crackled back. The computer shows everything within safe limits. Just focus on the hull repair. Jai-Ho frowned. In 25 years, he had learned to trust his instincts. The mech's sensors might be basic, but they were telling him something was wrong. I recommend we delay the repair until we check the engine, he said firmly. These readings remind me of the problems we had on Station 12 before its core failed. We're behind schedule already, Ta-Won replied. The ship needs to leave in 6 hours. Just patch the holes quickly. Jai-Ho moved his mech closer to the hull, but kept watching the engine readings. They were getting worse. The temperature spikes were becoming larger, and now he could see small energy surges in the power lines. He started the repair anyway, his mech's arms extending to hold a metal patch over the first hole. The welding tool lit up, creating a bright arc of light against the darkness of space. That's when he noticed the engine readings spiked dramatically. Emergency. All personnel clear the area, Jai-Ho shouted into his radio. The core is going critical. He didn't wait for a response. Years of experience took over as he pushed his mech away from the ship at full power. Behind him, the engine section began to glow with an unnatural blue light. The explosion started as a small blue flame at the ship's center. In seconds, it grew into a massive fireball that tore the cargo ship apart. The shock wave hit Jai-Ho's mech like a giant hand, sending him tumbling through space. Warning alarms blared inside his cockpit. The mech's systems were damaged, but the main life support was still working. Through spinning cameras, Jai-Ho saw pieces of the cargo ship flying in all directions. Dawn Station was barely visible in the distance, looking tiny against the vastness of space. Control, do you copy? Jai-Ho called into his radio. Static was his only answer. The explosion must have damaged his communication system. His mech continued to spin, and the stabilizers weren't responding properly. Using his experience, Jai-Ho fired the emergency thrusters in careful bursts, finally stopping the spin. When he could see clearly again, his heart sank. The explosion had thrown him much farther than he had thought. Dawn Station was now just a small dot of light, barely visible among the stars. His navigation system was damaged, and he had no way to calculate his position. Jai-Ho checked his systems one by one. Life support was working. Emergency power was online, but main power was damaged. Long-range communications were dead, and his thrusters were almost empty. He was alive, but he was drifting into deep space with no way to call for help. Looking at his fuel gauge, Jai-Ho did some quick math. He had enough emergency power and life support for about 3 weeks. After that, he pulled out the photo of Hey Newell and looked at it. I promised to come home, he said quietly, and I'm going to keep that promise. The endless stars stretched out before him as his mech drifted further into the void. This wasn't how he had planned to end his career, but now survival was the only thing that mattered. It was time to put his 25 years of experience to the ultimate test. 6 hours had passed since the explosion. Jai-Ho sat in his construction mech, watching the emergency lights blink on his control panel. Dawn Station was no longer visible. Earth was just another bright dot in the distance. He was truly alone. The inside of the mech was quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. Jai-Ho had spent countless hours in this machine, but never like this. Never so far from help. He looked at his main screen and began counting his resources. First thing in any emergency is to know what you have, he said to himself, remembering his training. The oxygen recyclers were working at 70% efficiency. Not perfect, but good enough to keep him breathing. Water recycling was also running, though it would need careful management. The emergency power cells were his biggest worry. They were designed for only a few days of use. Jai-Ho opened the maintenance panel under his seat. Years of fixing these machines had taught him every wire and circuit. He knew there might be ways to make the power last longer, but he would need to be clever. "Think," he said firmly. "Break the problem into small pieces." He pulled up the mech's diagnostic screen. The explosion had damaged several systems, but the basic structure was intact. The main radio was dead, but the short-range emergency beacon was still working. It was too weak to reach the station, but maybe it could be modified. A small light caught his eye. The mech's external repair kit was still attached to its leg. Inside were basic tools and some spare parts. They were meant for fixing the mech itself, but Jeho knew he could use them for other things. He checked his position using the stars he could see. The explosion had pushed him into a slow spin around the sun. At least he wasn't moving deeper into space, but his orbit would take him far from any normal space lanes. The communication screen suddenly flickered to life. For a moment, Jeho's heart jumped. Then he realized it was just a recorded message that had been stored in the system. Hey Newell's face appeared on the screen. "Hi, Dad," her recorded voice said. "I know you're busy with your final week, but I wanted to show you something. Remember how you taught me to fix my bike when I was little? Well, now I'm teaching my students the same way you taught me. Patient, step by step, understanding how things work." Jeho touched the screen gently. The message was from last week, but it gave him an idea. He had always taught Hey Newell to solve problems by understanding the basics first. Now he needed to do the same thing. He pulled up the mech's system diagrams on his screen. The construction mech wasn't designed for long-term survival, but it had everything needed to keep a human alive: air, water, power, and shelter. If he could understand how to connect these systems in new ways, he might be able to survive longer. 3 weeks of normal operation, he said, looking at his power readings. But nothing about this is normal. Time to think differently. Jeho began making notes on his tablet. He would need to change how the mech used power. The lights could be dimmer. Some systems could be shut down. Others could be rewired to work with less energy. Outside his viewport, space stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, rescue ships would be looking for him. But space was huge, and he was very small. No one had ever survived this long in just a construction mech. But then again, no one had spent 25 years learning every detail of how these machines worked. "I promised Hey Newell I would come home," he said, picking up his tools. "And to keep that promise, I need to make this mech do things it was never designed to do." Jeho worked steadily in the dim light of his mech. He had turned off most of the internal lights to save power, keeping only the essential displays active. It had been 24 hours since the explosion, and he had not wasted a single minute. The construction mech's cockpit now looked very different. Wires ran in new patterns across the ceiling. Parts that once controlled the welding arms now helped manage power flow. Jeho had rebuilt almost every system to use less energy. "Check power systems," he said to himself, reading from his tablet. The screen showed the power usage dropping to 40% of normal. It wasn't comfortable, but it would help him survive longer. The water recycling system had been his biggest success. Construction mechs normally wasted a lot of water cooling their tools. Jeho had redirected this system, making it clean and reuse water more efficiently. He now had enough water for nearly a month. He looked at the breathing mask hanging near his face. The oxygen recyclers were working better than expected. By slowing his breathing and staying calm, he could make the air last longer. He had learned this trick years ago during long repair jobs. A small sound made him look up. The emergency beacon he had modified was sending out its signal. Jeho had taken parts from the broken main radio to make it stronger. It wasn't as powerful as he wanted, but it was better than nothing. "Day 1 status update," he said, recording a message on his tablet. "All critical systems are working. Power usage is down. Water recycling is stable. Next task is to check the external damage." Jeho pressed a button, and the external cameras turned on one by one. He needed to see what damage the explosion had caused to the outside of his mech. The cameras showed dents and scratches, but the main structure was strong. Then he noticed something interesting. The repair tools on the mech's leg were still intact. Among them was a laser cutter designed to cut through metal. Jiho had an idea. If he could modify the laser, it might be useful for signaling rescue ships. He started working on the laser system. His hands moved carefully in the confined space. Every movement had to be precise. One mistake could waste precious energy or damage important equipment. While he worked, Jiho played Haenul's message again. Her voice filled the quiet cockpit. "Remember how you taught me to fix my bike? Start with what you know works, then improve it step by step." Jiho smiled. It was exactly what he was doing now, starting with what he knew, the mech's basic systems, and improving them one by one. His daughter had learned well. The laser modification took 3 hours to complete. When he finished, Jiho had created a signal light that used very little power but could flash brightly enough to be seen from far away. He set it to flash in a pattern that any rescue ship would recognize as a distress signal. Day 1 completed, he recorded in his log. Power systems modified. Water recycling improved. Emergency beacon strengthened. Signal light created. Survival time extended to approximately 25 days. He looked out at the stars through his viewport. Somewhere out there, people would be searching for him. His job now was to stay alive until they found him. Every modification he made to the mech gave him a better chance. Jiho touched the photo of Haenul that he had attached to his control panel. "One day down," he said quietly. "I just need to survive 24 more. Then I'm coming home." 1 week had passed since the explosion. Jiho sat in his dimly lit construction mech, watching the stars move slowly past his viewport. The silence of space felt heavier than ever before. He had been alone for 7 days, with no sign of rescue. Day 7 status report. Jiho spoke into his tablet, trying to keep his voice steady. "All modified systems are working as planned. Power consumption remains stable. Water recycling at 90% efficiency. Emergency beacon continues to transmit." He paused the recording and looked at his reflection in the dark screen. His face looked tired, but his eyes were still alert. Staying busy had helped him avoid thinking too much about his situation. But in quiet moments like this, the vastness of space pressed in on him. Jiho remembered what Chief Engineer Yunhee had taught him years ago. The mind needs maintenance just like machines do. Following this advice, he had created a strict daily schedule. Every hour was planned, mixing system checks with exercise and rest periods. As he exercised in the small space, using resistance bands made from spare cables, Jiho noticed something extraordinary through his viewport. A cloud of cosmic dust caught the light of a distant star, creating colors he had never seen before. It was beautiful and strange. "Additional log entry," he said, grabbing his tablet. "Observing unusual space phenomena at coordinates marked 37. Colors suggest presence of rare elements. Could be useful for future mining operations." Even in his desperate situation, the engineer in him wanted to record everything he saw. These observations helped keep his mind sharp. They gave him a purpose beyond just surviving. He played Haenul's message again, something he did 3 times each day. Her voice helped him track time and stay connected to home. Today, he noticed something new in the background of her video. A poster about space radiation on her laboratory wall. This gave Jiho an idea. He pulled up the mech's radiation sensors on his screen. They were simple devices, meant to warn workers of danger. But if he could modify them, they might help him detect nearby ships or stations. Working carefully with his limited tools, Jiho began adjusting the radiation sensors. The work was delicate, and his hands shook slightly from fatigue. But he kept going, remembering Yunhee's words about staying focused on the task at hand. Hours passed as he worked. The modified sensor began picking up new signals, faint traces of radiation from distant stars and space debris. It wasn't much, but it gave him more information about his surroundings. Day 7, evening update, he recorded. Modified radiation sensors operational. No significant readings yet, But system is working. Personal status: tired but focused. Mental state: stable. Jaiho looked at the small calendar he had drawn on his tablet. 7 days down, about 18 more to go before his life support would fail. The numbers were always in his mind, but he refused to let them frighten him. As he prepared for his rest period, Jaiho saw something remarkable. A small meteor streaked past his viewport, leaving a trail of bright blue light. In his 25 years of space work, he had never seen one so close. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "being lost out here is showing me things few humans have ever seen." He touched the photo of Hainul and smiled. "When I get home, I'll have quite a story to tell you. Your old dad's probably the first construction worker to see these things up close." The stars continued their slow dance outside as Jaiho settled in for another night in the void. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, he had his memories, his work, and the incredible view of the universe to keep him company. At Dawn Station, Station Director Mira Choi stood before the large command screen, studying the search patterns. 2 weeks had passed since the cargo ship explosion. Most people thought finding Jaiho was impossible, but she refused to give up. "Show me the debris field analysis again," she ordered. The screen displayed thousands of dots, representing pieces of the destroyed ship. Each dot had a path showing its movement through space. Do Hyun Kang, a young rescue pilot, watched from his station. He had been studying the debris patterns for days. Something about them seemed strange to him, but he couldn't explain what it was. "Director Choi," he said suddenly, standing up, "may I show you something unusual?" Myra walked to his screen. Do-hyun pointed to a section of the debris field that was moving differently from the rest. "Look at this area," he said. "The debris here is moving in an unusual pattern. It's too organized. Something or someone is affecting it." Mireille leaned closer to the screen. The young pilot was right. A small section of debris was moving in a way that didn't match natural physics. Meanwhile, in his construction mech, Jaiho was working on his latest survival project. He had noticed that his mech's magnetic systems could move nearby metal debris. By carefully timing the magnetic pulses, he was creating a pattern in the debris field. "Day 14 status report," he recorded. "Modified magnetic system is working, using debris to create visible patterns. Power usage higher than planned, but necessary for potential rescue." Back at Dawn Station, Do-hyun studied the strange debris movement more carefully. He had spent 3 years as a rescue pilot, but he had never seen anything like this. "Director," he said, "these patterns look almost like old ship emergency codes. The kind they taught us about in rescue training." Myreille's eyes widened. She remembered those codes from her early days in space work. They were simple patterns that stranded ships used to signal for help. Could it be Jaiho? She wondered aloud. He would know those old codes. Do-hyun checked his calculations again. "The patterns are coming from just outside our normal search area. We didn't look there because the explosion shouldn't have thrown anything that far." Myreille made her decision quickly. "Prepare your rescue ship," she ordered Do-hyun. "Take extra fuel and life support supplies. If it is Jaiho, he'll need them." In space, Jaiho watched his magnetic pulses move the debris. The work was draining his mech's power faster than he wanted, but he had no choice. His oxygen would last only another week. Through his viewport, he could see the pieces of metal moving in the pattern he remembered from his training. The same pattern that had saved his friend's life 15 years ago on a damaged mining ship. "Power at 30%, his system warned. Jaiho knew he was taking a risk using so much energy, but the debris pattern was his best chance of being found. Do-hyun's rescue ship launched from Dawn Station an hour later. As the ship accelerated toward the debris field, he thought about what they might find. No one had ever survived this long in just a construction mech. But if anyone could do it, it would be Jaiho Kim, the station's most experienced worker. The stars stretched endlessly before them as the rescue mission began. Somewhere in that vast darkness, An old construction worker was fighting to stay alive, using everything he had learned in 25 years of space work to signal for help. Do-hyun's rescue ship moved carefully through the debris field. His radar screen showed hundreds of metal pieces floating around him, all moving in the strange pattern they had seen from the station. In the pilot's seat, he watched every movement carefully, knowing one mistake could damage his ship. Rescue 1 to Dawn Station. He called over the radio. I'm approaching the source of the pattern. No visual contact yet. Copy that. Rescue 1. Ray's voice replied. Remember, if it is Jai-ho, his power might be very low. Work quickly but safely. Inside his construction mech, Jai-ho watched his power level drop lower. The magnetic pulses were using the last of his energy, but he had no choice. His oxygen would run out in 5 days, and his water recycling system was starting to fail. Final power reserve at 15%, his system warned. Jai-ho knew that when it reached 10%, he would lose life support. He touched the photo of Hae-nul one more time, hoping his gamble would work. Suddenly, his modified radiation sensor started beeping. Something big was moving nearby. Through his viewport, Jai-ho saw a light in the distance. It was moving in a search pattern, the same pattern used by rescue ships. Jai-ho's hands moved quickly over his controls. He had saved a tiny amount of fuel for this moment. With careful calculations, he fired his thrusters to push a large piece of debris into a new position. On his rescue ship, Do-hyun saw the movement immediately. The large piece of metal had suddenly changed direction, moving in a way that debris never would naturally. His training told him this was important. Dawn Station, I saw deliberate movement, he reported. Something or someone is controlling the debris. Moving to investigate. Jai-ho watched the rescue ship grow larger in his viewport. His heart beat faster as he realized help was finally near. But his mech's power level had dropped to 12%. He needed to act fast. Using the last of his thruster fuel, Jai-ho pushed his mech toward a clear area of space. The movement cost him precious power, but it would make it easier for the rescue ship to reach him. Do-hyun's ship lights swept through the darkness. Then they caught something that wasn't debris, the familiar shape of a construction mech, its metal surface scared but intact. Dawn Station. Visual contact. Do-hyun called excitedly. I found him. Construction mech CW2187. Repeat. I found Jai-ho. Inside his mech, Jai-ho heard a crackling sound. His emergency radio, silent for 2 weeks, was picking up a signal. Construction mech CW2187. This is Rescue 1. Do-hyun's voice came through. Do you copy? Jai-ho pressed his radio button, hoping it would work. CW2187 here, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Power critical. Life support failing. Need immediate pickup. Understood, Do-hyun replied. Starting rescue procedure now. Hold on, sir. We're bringing you home. The rescue ship moved closer, carefully avoiding the debris. Jai-ho watched as it approached, its docking arm extending toward his mech. His power level showed 11%, just enough to keep him alive for the rescue. Hae-nul, he whispered, looking at her photo. Your father kept his promise. I'm coming home. The rescue ship's docking arm locked onto his mech with a solid clunk. After 2 weeks alone in space, Jai-ho finally allowed himself to relax. He had survived the impossible, using everything he had learned in 25 years of space work. Now, it was time to go home. The medical bay of Dawn Station was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Jai-ho sat on the edge of his bed, looking out the window at the stars. After 3 days of rest and treatment, the doctors had finally declared him healthy enough to leave. Director Miro Choi stood in the doorway, holding a tablet. The engineering team just finished examining your construction mech, she said. They want to study all your modifications. No one has ever kept a construction mech running that long in deep space. Jai-ho nodded slowly. The mech did its job. It kept me alive, Because I understood how it worked. 25 years of experience finally paid off. A small crowd had gathered in the station's main hall to welcome Jae-ho. As he walked in, supported by Do-hyun, the room erupted in applause. Workers, engineers, and station staff all wanted to celebrate the impossible survival of their most experienced colleague. Tae-won Park stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Jae-ho, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have listened when you warned me about the engine readings. Your experience saw what our computers missed." "We all learn from our mistakes," Jae-ho replied kindly. "The important thing is to make sure it doesn't happen again." Director Mi-rae called for everyone's attention. "Because of this incident, we're making changes to our safety protocols," she announced. "From now on, experienced workers' observations will carry the same weight as computer readings. Sometimes, human experience sees things machines cannot." The main screen in the hall suddenly lit up with an incoming transmission. Newell's face appeared, her eyes filled with tears of joy. She had been waiting anxiously for this moment since hearing about her father's rescue. "Dad," she called out, "I can't believe you did it. You actually survived out there in just a construction mech." Jae-ho moved closer to the screen, smiling at his daughter. "I had a good reason to survive," he said. "I promised to come home, didn't I? And you know I always keep my promises." "The university wants you to give a lecture," Newell said excitedly. "They want to hear how you modify the mech systems. Your survival story is already being added to space engineering textbooks." Do-hyun stepped forward. "Sir, would you consider staying at the station? Not for construction work, but as a teacher. We need someone with your experience to train new workers." Jae-ho looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues. He had planned to retire, to leave space behind. But his time alone in the void had taught him something important. His experience could save lives. "I'll stay," he said finally, "but not just as a teacher. I want to work with the engineering team to improve the construction mechs. Make them safer, better at keeping people alive in emergencies." Director Mi-rae smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. We're creating a new position, Chief of Safety and Emergency Systems. The job is yours if you want it." Newell beamed from the screen. "Dad, you're going to help make space safer for everyone. I'm so proud of you." Jae-ho touched the screen where his daughter's face showed. "I thought those 3 weeks in space would be the end of my story," he said. "Instead, they're just the beginning of a new one." The stars continued their eternal dance outside the station's windows. Somewhere out there, Jae-ho's construction mech floated in the repair bay, its systems still bearing the marks of his incredible survival. Its modifications would help shape the future of space construction, making the dangerous work of building humanity's path to the stars a little bit safer for everyone who followed.